Well, thank you for being able to meet up today. I
Oh, yeah,
appreciate it.
my pleasure.
I'd love if you could just talk about, because I don't know if everyone's going to know exactly what Feldenkrais method is.
Sure. So the Feldenkrais method was designed by Moshe Feldenkrais, and he was a scientist in the last century, and he actually worked in the Marie Curie labs. Everybody's kind of getting to know her because of her. She was the first, I think, female to win a Nobel Prize in science, and so, anyways, he has a very rich and long history. But one of the things that just for a quick biography, he basically walked from his home in Russia to Palestine when he was 14, due to war and things that we can't even imagine. As bad as things feel right now in the pandemic, the World War I and II were even more just mind-boggling, I think. Anyways, so he was very interested in self-defense, and he actually went on and became one of the first judo masters in the West. So he was very much into martial arts and learning. But he went on and got several PhDs in science and just one of the great thinkers of the last century. He had a very physical guy, but he had a soccer injury from his youth. And when he went to the doctors to see about what could be done about this. This is in like 1950 or so, and they said, well, you have like about a 50% chance of it working again. And as a scientist, those weren't great odds, right?
Hmm.
So he said, no, thank you. And so what he did is he started to apply physics and what he knew about physics and science to the human condition and how humans learn how to walk and learn how to crawl. And so he started to do these experiments with himself. And he had met, other great thinkers at that time, Ida Rolf. He had met Alexander at one point. And so it was kind of in the culture at that point. I mean, Freud, it was just this kind of awakening of awareness, right, in the last century. So anyways, he started doing these what became known today as awareness through movement lessons, and he was able to figure out a way to fully function on his knee and walk like normal and do the things that he wanted to be able to do. So he started helping scientists do this, and he would hold these awareness through movement classes for his colleagues who had aches and pains and it's different things going on. And then he started doing a hands-on work with them where he would touch them very, very gently in such a way to wake up the nervous system and help them become aware of patterns of movement that were not serving them. And that's called functional integration lessons. We're obviously not doing those right now. So a lot of us have transitioned into doing awareness through movement classes online and then private sessions where we design the lessons for the person. So it's kind of an interesting time. So the work is done in two ways, awareness through movement, and he left over 500 lessons. And these were really designed to move the human body in every way that it was designed to move skeletally. So we all have habits of movement that we don't think about. Actually, and they're good. Every single movement pattern that you do is a habit. Every one that you do without thinking is a habit, right? And if we didn't have those habits, we'd have to relearn how to get out of bed every day. So he essentially figured out that we all have these blind spots, and how can we start to utilize how the nervous system learns in order to become our most potent self. And he actually wrote a book called The Potent Self. So yeah, so that's a little bit about Moshe, a little bit about the work. And so there are awareness through movement classes popping up online everywhere now because it was kind of actually his dream that he could teach this to the masses. And he actually had an online radio class.
Wow.
And yeah, that was very interesting, right? I mean, like whatever it was, 50, 60, 70 years ago, that was broadcast. And Monday nights, people would lie on the floor and do these awareness through movement lessons in Israel. And I think in Germany also. So, in a way, it's like Moshe's dream of being able to teach everybody how to really use themselves the best possible way. It's kind of coming true because we're all doing this online, and I have now, students in India and there's one in Hong Kong who are coming to these classes. So it's really an interesting time.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a little bit about the method.
And the awareness through movement are the classes, and you incorporate the techniques by Feldenkrais in those classes.
Yeah, so basically, I like to think of them as like little compositions. And sometimes there are different lessons that lead into, more and more and more. And so then it's kind of like a sonata, right? You have different movements. And so
Mm,
you can do one piece of it or do the whole thing. So the lessons are, I would say the main thing to know about them is they teach you how to slow down in such a way that you can actually begin to sense how you do something.
mm,
So, talking about TMJ, that's a good maybe segue. Um, you know, a lot of times how we use ourselves, we don't know what we're doing, right? We just do it and we don't know why we do it. It doesn't really even necessarily matter.
mm,
But to be able to understand how the brain works and how the brain learns. So that is kind of the theme throughout all the lessons is how to slow down, sense yourself, and then do these different movement combinations and ask how does this relate to this? What
mm,
part of yourself are you not using? And really kind of entering the like early childhood sensations of movement. And so we're actually accessing the deeper brain stem. And it's the same part of your brain that you used when you were learning how to walk, right? So you couldn't necessarily articulate at that point, oh, I'm going to feel my right foot and put my weight over here, and oh, I can move my left foot forward and I can walk like mommy now, right? You wouldn't actually say that, but that part of your brain that's still that's responsible for learning is still active. It's still there and it can be accessed, which is really exciting. So
mm,
that's kind of a way to describe how the lessons, a main theme, I would say, in all the lessons.
mm.
Some of the lessons are much smaller, more intimate, dealing with breathe. I just did a whole breathing series on exploring each lobe of the lung. So it has a lot to do with imagination. There is also psychology components because he's really looking at how the whole organism works. Then there are some lessons like I'm doing on Thursday mornings now that are bigger lessons. So learning how to get off the floor in an elegant, easy way, learning how to change orientation to gravity without struggling. And so it's a wide range based on sort of his whole experience in life.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow, there's a couple of things that come to mind when you talk about that. These slow and subtle movements in order to see what your body, or in order to feel what your body is doing, right? So by doing that, uh, you're able to notice the tension more readily. Am I correct? And then it's about changing that habit.
Right. I think it's you know, I found this. I was lucky enough to find this work when I was young and in college, and the yoga class was full, and so I took this awareness through movement class. But a theme in my life was, relax, relax. Everybody kept telling me to relax, and I was very driven, and I had no understand. I couldn't figure out what that meant. Relax what, where, why, when.
Mm,
Um, if you relax everything, then you just become a skeleton on the floor. You just collapse.
yep.
So, um, so these lessons, I would take these lessons and I would go into these classes and I would try to move slow, and I don't think I really did for months and months and months. But I would leave and I would feel just so light. I would feel
Mm,
parts of myself that I didn't even know existed. And it was like one of those things. I just had to keep following it and keep following it. So it became less about fixing tension or letting go of tension.
mm,
I was obsessed with that because I was being told that, that's what I should be doing, because you see people who are tense and you want to help them.
Hmm.
But what I learned was how to use myself effectively from the inside out, so from the skeleton out, to then not need to get rid of tension because learned how not to have it. I learned how to function without it, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. So it's a little bit less about fixing something, although it gets fixed because you've learned how to do something differently.
It's like solving through awareness and just
Yeah.
observation.
Yeah, and I would say, he was such a scientist that the way he thought about awareness was such just so tactile. It was not this kind of woo woo, airy fairy like
Hmm.
crystals or whatever. I'm not judging. I'm just, you know, it was very scientific. Can you feel your left foot on the ground, and what part of your left foot is taking weight? And when you start to ask those kinds of questions, it's like, no, I can't feel that. I don't know where that is.
Hmm.
Interesting. Um, so it's kind of just waking up that part of the brain and then being able to reorganize it around any function that you're trying to do.
Mm.
So,
And as a musician, is this? I mean, this wasn't created for musicians. This was kind of created for anybody, correct?
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a musician, how do you feel like you've incorporated it into your own playing? Because you're a
Oh,
clarinetist, correct?
yeah. Well, I think it's the same thing as my playing now.
Yeah.
Um, but to follow that a little bit more, before I ever took an awareness through movement class, I mean years and years before. So I was maybe a freshman in college. This is when I
Hmm.
came down with came down with TMJ, where I couldn't even eat, and I was very determined to fix it, but I knew that it was painful, so I had to stop doing what I was doing, which was very difficult, as you know, to just
Hmm.
stop practicing when you're supposed to be really engaging in that. And this is before I knew Feldenkrais or Alexander or anything, but I did kind of an Alexandery thing, which I watched myself play in the mirror. And I watched what happened. And I could see that when I would go to play, my jaw would jet forward, right? So the TMJ is the disorder of the temporomandibular joint, which is, I don't know if you can see that, but right, it's the top
Hmm.
of the.
Yeah.
Everybody can feel it if you put your fingers right in front of your ears and open and close your mouth. You can feel that's the joint that gets inflamed. And so I watched myself dislocate that and push the jaw forward. And I thought, that's interesting. That's probably why that's happening. It doesn't feel like it should be. I've done that for years, but it probably shouldn't be the way you play the clarinet. So then I stared and I tried to get myself to stop doing that. And I mean, I couldn't at first figure out how to control the muscles that I could see were moving, but I couldn't feel them moving.
Mm.
Because why? They were habitual. Habitual movement by design, you don't necessarily feel because you need it to just work for you, right?
Hmm.
So I slowed it down. I mean, this was like the first awareness through movement lesson I ever took, but nobody told me. I was just so paranoid that I just had to figure it out. So I slowed it down to the point where I could really find the exact moment when my jaw would push forward. And I just played. I played opening the jaw, letting it go, opening it, and trying to just not do the movement of pushing it forward. Then I laid down on the floor and did that. And I remember distinctly just moving so slowly that I could start to feel the back of my neck relax and all the way through myself. And I just remember going into this zone. I was like some other land. And then I was able to learn, neurologically speaking, through somatics, through feeling, how to keep my jaw sort of aligned in such a way that it only opened and closed rather than pushing forward and backwards. So then fast forward to, 4 years later, and I took my first awareness through movement class, and I thought, this is what I did. This is how I taught myself, right? But it wasn't because I necessarily somebody told me to slow down and feel everything and sense everything and observe myself. It was kind of out of this panic of I wanted to be able to put in those 4 hours a day I was supposed to be doing. So
Gosh, yeah, and I'm just thinking about the way you're describing it and these really um, really detailed, specific movements, how much patience and non-judgmental um, point of view that must have took.
yeah, yeah, that's a really great observation because I think at that point when I was so young, I just was just so desperate to not drop out of school or something because I couldn't play. But there's a big theme in this work of being able to distance yourself. So to be able to observe yourself without judging yourself. Because in a judgment, there's a good or bad. And we're not really about finding the good way or the bad way to do something. In fact, a lot of these awareness or movement lessons, he'll teach how to breathe one way, and then he'll teach the exact opposite. And that is on purpose to free the organism from their habitual mental holdings or things that they've been taught that maybe aren't structurally correct, or it's just one way of doing something. So we're really about finding 10 ways of doing something and then finding that one right way for you, for that moment, for that function that you're trying to do. So, yeah, the non judgmental aspect of it is really important, and it takes a while for some of us to develop that ability to just observe.
Mm.
Yeah.
I've never thought of it that way, just trying to find all these different ways to do that, like you said, breathing, just so you can kind of have those in your toolbox, right? And kind of pull it out whenever.
Yeah, and I think of it even as maybe even broader than that, that your ability to move and function in any way is you,
Mm.
right? And so it's not that you have to pick up a tool and use it, but then that just become you are the toolbox in a way. And some of these, like especially with some of the breathing lessons, I had a student last week in class say, I've been breathing my whole life and I've never felt how easy it was to breathe until this lesson. And why is that? Who knows? But it's just the ability to put yourself in that space and slow down and really investigate these. And that's what's really helpful about, I think, these awareness through movement lessons.
Oh, it's really a way of being.
Yeah, it becomes a practice, right? So back to that question of how do I use it for my clarinet, it's really about listening. How many musicians do we know that don't know how to listen?
Mm.
And so it's really turning the lens inward to listen to how you, as the instrument, is able to agree with itself, to able to not fight with itself. So it's a really kind of it's beautiful work for musicians because it turns on this really deep listening to yourself that when you go back to your instrument with that part of your brain turned on, it's a completely different thing. Then
Mm.
it doesn't have anything to do with these external reasons for doing things. It's really about what you want to express or you want to say because you know what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why this is a really interesting time, I think, for musicians to sort of turn that sort of cone inward and rediscover some of those primary reasons why we started to play our instruments in the first place when we were kids. So yeah,
Mm.
it's an interesting time.
Wow. That's wonderfully said. I'm just thinking about it, trying to soak it all in.
Yeah, I know. It's fun.
How well, you kind of talked about how you got interested in Feldenkrais work, but what is the uh, licensure process like?
Yeah, It's a usually 4-year process, and it's designed a little differently depending on each instructor. So I'll back up and say that there's a Feldenkrais Guild of North America, and then there's an international Feldenkrais Federation as well. And um, each trainer is certified by an accreditation board within that guild, and trainers put on training programs that last for 4 years. Now, my training program was for 2 months in the summer, every 4 years. I mean, every year for 4 years. Some have weekends or a whole week spread out throughout the year. Currently, I think all training programs are on pause because they are touch based. So you learn in the first 2 years how to teach awareness through movement and can become certified just to do that. And then the last 2 years are awareness through movement, but then add in a little bit or a lot more of the hands-on functional integration. So it worked out well for me because I was young and didn't have anything going on in my summers except for practicing, and so I did that for 4 summers. And it's very experiential based. So we learn about anatomy, but from the inside out. So we'll do a movement lesson. We'll learn what is it that's moving, so you really sense what you're doing. And your brain really, after doing that for 8 hours a day for several days and then several years, your brain really changes. I mean, I visit my old self pre my training program and pat her on the head, and I'm so glad that she found this work because it was such a reorganizing experience on so many levels. So
Hmm.
yeah.
You initially wanted to do it in a way to help TMJ, correct?
Oh, I would say my whole body because
Okay.
I didn't really have TMJ after I learned how to fix it. Once I did, I would, and if it started to creep in again, I would do what I did before. And what I noticed was, I could feel myself learning how to do it differently. So the amount of time it would take me to like access like how to slow down and make sure my jaw wasn't moving forward and my head was in space in a good way, that amount of time shortened and shortened. So then I never really had to deal with surgery or any of that. I fixed it
Mm.
fairly quickly by going slow.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing in music, right? When we teach our students how to play a fast passage, you go slow. But this is even on a slower level.
Mm.
So, uh, so why did I become a practitioner? You know, I had no idea that I was going to do something like this. I went to grad school and I went to these awareness through movement classes with Rich Goldsand, and I would leave and I would just feel so much lighter and freer and mentally happier. And then in 4 days, I would be back to my more serious, very serious self. And then I'd
Mm-hmm.
go back to this class, and I just kept having this like roller coaster experience of like what life could possibly feel like and what it was habitually feeling like.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was just one of those lucky things that happened. In life, you look back and sometimes you couldn't have planned it any better. But I was planning to visit with my aunt in Sonoma, Northern California, for a while after I graduated, and it just so happened there was a training program starting then that summer, and I even signed up and applied and said I'm only going to do a month of this, just for myself, just to go have a deep dive into myself. And after the first day, it was very clear I needed to do the whole training program.
Mm.
So
Wow.
yeah, so I've had sort of a dual music Feldenkrais career, and it's really been a lovely journey.
That's incredible. And so how would you say that you use this work with your students, like in your private studio for clarinet?
Yeah, specifically with clarinet and TMJ, since we're talking about it, and I think you asked too what I call the magic zone.
Yes.
So, when teaching kids I think you play saxophone, right? So
Yeah.
we teach this thing called the embouchure, and moving your mouth and trying to hold it in a certain way. And um, so there's a couple things that I especially with TMJ that I look for. But everything that I say here, I just want to preface with there's a temptation by teachers, I think, to hear some of this information and then go to their students and say, don't move your jaw forward. But what's really important about this is that you don't actually say that. Because when you say or you instruct someone to do something or don't do something, that lands in the cognitive, the frontal lobe of their brain. That's where they process language, but it's not necessarily where you process movement. So, what I try to do with my students is give them as much information as possible through making them feel very safe. And then when something comes up that maybe, like I had a student last week who her neck was really bothering her, and she's very intense, and I teach piano too, and she's very into it. And so we took a half an hour and we just did some movement in a chair and got her to slow down to feel what she's doing. So there's some things like with clarinet that I look for. If I tell them to straighten their chin or make an ooh sound, and if there's a lot of movement with their jaw forward, I say, okay, so now what I want you to try is I want you to put your hands here, feel what you're doing, know what you're doing, feel it now, do it again. Okay, your jaw goes forward, great, let it go forward. So we have this thing in Feldenkrais where we agree with the system first. So the system knows what it's doing. Go with it. Okay, all right, good. Oh, so your jaw comes forward. What else moves? Can you feel that on your sit bones? Oh, what happens in your spine? Can you do it to the side? Can you do it to this side? Can you do it with your elbow in the air? So that you create this larger ability to pay attention to yourself. Um, and then I'll have them try the same thing, but don't let it come forward. Keep the jaw back. Or sometimes I have kids take the mustache and I say, push your mustache back. Mustache back. And that's because with clarinet players and saxophone players, the skull, the occiput often jets forward, which then even if your jaw's not coming forward, now the pattern of gravity through your system is not over your spine. So it becomes your head is much heavier. Whether you feel it or not, your head is heavier. So I'll oftentimes have them play with how their jaw comes forward and back, or play from here. So getting the movement of the head looser. With younger kids is you have to kind of see if that works or not. It's a little more helpful with people who are a little older who already have like some orientation or some habits that that you can work with. So it kind of depends on the age of the kid a little bit. But I love this idea of this mustache coming back. So you can even try that now, and everybody at home can try that. So first I have people just feel their sit bones, and that's the bottom of your pelvis. And so they're quite close into the center of yourself, yeah? And so actually just take a hand and sit on one. And if you're on a squishy bench, it's harder, but just feel where the pointy part of the pelvis is. And I call that like your feet in sitting. That's where your support is. Now take your hand out and feel how much clearer it is. Yeah? And then do it on the other side. And just notice, is that side different? Is it pokier? Is it rounder? What is it? And then take that side out. And then feel, what do you do? Do you sit on those? Do you sit in front of them, or do you sit behind them? So then I'll have people take take their hands and put it on the top of their pelvis or their waist. And so you can do that. And then just imagine that your pelvis is like a soup bowl and you're going to tilt it backwards. See how it moves backwards. And so then tilt your pelvis backwards and let your head come down. And that's the way, one way that the spine is designed to move. You'll have some kids in your studio that sit like this. Well, it's not a bad thing in some level because that's how the spine's designed to move. Now roll the pelvis up. Feel the sit bones on the bottom of your pelvis. Feel where they're sharp and then go back. And also notice how you're breathing as you do this. Where do you breathe? Where do you feel yourself breathing? Without judging it or changing it.
Or if you're breathing.
If you're breathing, that's a whole nother topic. And we can talk about that in a second. It's a great topic with musicians, actually. So now come up to where you feel they're kind of sharp. And now try the opposite. Roll it forward. Like you're going to take your soup bowl or your ice cream bowl forward. And notice what your head does. Where does it go? It goes into extension. Yeah? So everybody has a habit of sitting either here or here or here, and all of that has an effect on your diaphragm. And so I help kids. This is something you can do easily with kids who aren't shy. Help them find their sit bones and then find how their head can be right on top of their sit bones. So that when you then take your head from one side to the other, it feels much lighter. So try that. Just wiggle your head and see, can you feel that your head can shift weight and it shifts onto the pelvis on one side or the other. And then you can also then move your head forward. So bring that the skull forward. Now feel how uncomfortable that is.
Yeah.
Right? And so many kids, that's where they start. So I do little tiny skeletal warm-ups with them like that. And I actually have a little 5-minute skeletal warm-ups, I call them, that they're just tiny tastes of ATM lessons. And if any of your listeners are interested, it's free. You just go to my website, erinfinkelstein.com/contact. And I'm just going to make these 5-minute things that you can do lying down on the floor, and that you can just start to explore the very beginning of this before you go to practice. So there's not really a right or a wrong way to do anything, but it starts to just give this idea that you can really affect how you feel when you play. So I don't know if that helps with teaching. It's a little tricky because you want people to have good habits and help them build good habits without sort of letting your words get in the way of that.
To think that it starts with the language and the rhetoric is something that I haven't. It's not something that I've thought of before. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, we all sort of struggle with this as teachers, I think, of how much to teach by rote and how much to teach by experience and how much to teach. And I think you really have to know each student and get to know them and know what their motivations are and how to help them really sort of achieve their ability to learn. That's how I think of teaching, and I got this from my training program, that, Feldenkrais said, I'll be your last teacher because I'm going to teach you how to learn. And what if that was the goal for all teachers, to teach their student how to learn? That's a very different goal. It's a very different goal. So,
yeah,
especially in music.
Absolutely. One that's hard to wrap your head around, I think.
Yeah.
It's so habitual the way that
It's a lot of lineage, it's a lot of copying your teacher, which is, it's not a bad thing until it is for someone, right? And it's just where that line is. I think that's really important to just keep in mind and to watch for in your students. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Shall we do some chair work?
Sure. So we did a little bit right there, but one
Mm-hmm.
thing that is nice to play around with is to start to incorporate sort of the movements of the whole skeleton. A lot of awareness through movement lessons, I'd say the majority of them, but not all, are done lying down. And one of the reasons for that is because when your nervous system is in a different orientation to gravity, it's not as habitual.
Mm.
So when you're in an upright position, you're going to rely on your habits in your nervous system more because it's a more social interaction. So keep that in mind as you go along. So one of the things I like to teach little kids or anyone is just, and you've probably done this before, but to talk about habits and how automatic they are is to just put your hands together and take them apart a few times. So don't even think about it. Just feel how you do that. Just interlace them and take them out. And notice for yourself which thumb is on top. And so notice that you didn't choose that, right? So now go ahead and continue to do the same thing, but switch over the thumbs. Now I will say for some musicians, that's not going to feel that different. But for most people, that feels quite different, right? So just feel, where does it feel different? What touches first? Does it feel different anywhere throughout your whole arm or your shoulder even?
Mm.
Yeah? So now go back to your original way and feel what's different about that after doing that. Does it feel even more comfortable, maybe? So when I talk about sort of finding one's magic zone, I'm talking about if you do it the habitual way. But now let's just hold there for a second. We'll just say that maybe your habitual way of doing something has a little tension built into it, or has something that your teacher doesn't want you to do for whatever reason. And the way that's the better way is the non habitual way. Yeah? How do you make the non habitual feel good and habitual? Yeah?
Mm.
So now this is, and I'll show you with the clarinet in a second, but go ahead and do it the non-habitual way. But what I want you to do this time is go so slow that you can really feel your movement of your breath. You can notice when you hold it, and you can start to feel that at some point when your hands come closer together, you have some choices because you don't really know where your fingers are going to land. So just feel that. Feel all the little sensations in your muscles that say, am I going to interlace the non-habitual way? And then, oh, when I landed, they didn't even interlace. So then go back, and just start to play with that. And I call this the magic zone because this is where you're accessing the part of your brain that can sense each surface area of every finger. And notice if when you hold your breath. And so when you hold your breath, or when anybody holds their breath, that is a function of the nervous system saying, it's a little too challenged, go slower. So that's a key for your students. If you notice they're holding their breath, don't tell them not to. Get them to go slower, break it down more, make it more fun so that they can really sense, it's okay to play in this area that's non-habitual.
Mm.
Yeah? So that's what I call sort of the magic zone. And then as it becomes more and more habitual, if you practice it every day, then it starts to become, I can do it quicker, I can do it easier, I can do it that starts to not feel so weird.
Mm.
So with people who have sort of acute TMJ problems, just grab my clarinet. Um, this is something that I do after it sort of heals, in that it's less inflamed. So when they're coming back to their instrument, I have them do the same thing, right? I have them bring their instrument to their face so slowly, and nobody wants to do this. Nobody does it at first. They go, and it's because that's what the nervous system does. That's the habit. So then I say, cool, great. Now see if you can do it so slowly that you can feel like you're moving through molasses. And you'll see any number of things, you know, or you'll see, all right? And then, so only at that point will I tell the student, do it again, but feel what you do with your head. Feel that it moves forward. Because then you've accessed that part of their brain, you know, and this you can only really do this with students who aren't trying to please you, right?
That's challenging.
Yeah, it is. It is. So with younger kids, right? So you can make a game of it. You can go, oh, put your head here or put your hand here and see, can you just bring it to you? And what happens? You know, and have them go try it out in a mirror at home. And, you know, the braver ones will do it. And the other kids that just want, you know, to mimic you, then okay, you let them mimic you, but you feel what you're doing.
Mm.
You don't do it habitually. You feel what you're doing so that you have that part of your brain there during the process. I think that's really important because I think that translates somehow. I don't know if I could articulate how exactly, but it's less of working from an ego place, be like me, and it's more working from this is how I make music. I listen, I listen, and then I give it to you. Does that make sense? So,
Absolutely.
so the magic zone, I think, is this like, what happens right there? Is that what you want to have happen? Right? And then, you know, figuring out how does that change your music making? You know, then letting it go. So integration is the piece of it where you let it go and you play with it again when it's interesting and then you let it go so that your nervous system doesn't get tighter around it but it gets interested in it, uses what it uses, and then you play with it. You just
Hmm.
make it fun. Another little thing I have people do sometimes if they're super habitual. I work with a lot of people who, you know, I play in symphony orchestras and I also work with those people, you know, in a Feldenkrais capacity. And that, when you get to a higher level in your playing, this is where this work can be even more beneficial, I think. Because you have to get so habituated in one way of doing things. You've won a job that way. Okay, what happens then when the habit becomes the problem? When playing all of a sudden feels just like a drudgery, but you can't put the other hand on top. You know, you can't really change anything. So it's about learning how to create this opportunity in your nervous system to make the habitual feel free again.
Mm.
So it's finding ways to do the non habitual so that when you come back to the thing that you have to do over and over and over, it literally refreshes that nervous system, that track in your brain.
Mm.
So,
And I think it takes approaching that with a positive mindset too, because habitual movement, when it doesn't work anymore, I think it sort of evokes this fear response, and then it's like, what do I do? How do I fix this?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then the fear response has a physical response. There's a fight or flight response that is a contraction. It is a folding. It is a coming in. And so it is a real problem for people. It's hard for people to find the right help, find the right solutions because they're looking to fix it. They need to fix it, but the fixing really comes through an education change.
Mm.
So I think honoring that fear is really important. Not judging yourself is important, and knowing that everyone goes through it at some point in their career if they're successful enough. They're just not talking about it because this is such an ego-based career in some way. So I think that's really important, what you brought
Yeah.
up.
I think that's what I'm trying to promote here too, is just um, talking about things that we all do go through because it's part of our learning and part of our career, but isn't talked about because of stigma.
Yeah, and I think it's really an opportunity to change some of that now that there aren't any concerts and people are really playing or not playing for very different reasons, and it feels very raw, doesn't it? I feel that. I feel like it's you know, there are moments where I'm just so into it, and then there's moments where I'm like, I really wish I had somebody to play with, like a
Yeah.
kid. Oh, I have no friends, but it's a real challenge, and especially, yeah, I mean, there's being a musician, and then there's the career of being a musician, and how those two intersect, and how they work together or don't work together. And now with this environment, it's very challenging, and I think that these lessons actually can really help because it gives you an opportunity to slow everything down so you can really know what's going on,
Mhm.
you know instead of I think there's a lot of anxiety right now, and this is a really a great way to help with anxiety because you can shift your, I call it, well, Feldenkrais said, coordinated action takes four parts, the coordination of four parts: thinking, sensing, moving, and feeling. So I call it the like action pie, coordinated action pie. And so, all of a sudden, our thinking is like three-fourths of the pie, right? Because we're just sitting at home thinking about what to do next. We can't, I mean, here in Phoenix, it's so hot, we can't move very much outside at
Yeah.
all. It was 90 degrees at 6 o'clock in the morning today. Um, so thinking about when one side of that pie, thinking, sensing, moving, or feeling, gets too big, you don't get coordinated action in your life. So, how to interrupt some of that so that you can have a little bit more freedom, even
Mm.
amidst this pandemic situation. So,
Mm. Yeah, because that is very possible.
yeah,
Cool. Well,
yeah.
thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to bring up or talk about?
I'm just happy to connect with any of your people who would like to try a class, or I'm I've got these 5-minute somatic awareness skeletal warm-ups that I'm happy to send out for free. Just visit my website, and then the Monday night classes I teach are 7:30 Pacific Standard Time, or Arizona's kind of in between, so I just use Pacific Standard.
Hmm.
And those are breathing lessons. So there are a lot of different breathing lessons. So we're going to do some interesting rhythmic breathing lessons this month. Thursdays are 9:30 Pacific time. And we're doing bigger lessons on spiraling and learning how to use yourself in different ways to spiral and get up off the floor. And they're really surprising. I mean, that sounds like kind of, why would I do that? But especially for people who are stuck at home, they're really enjoying these like bigger lessons. So in the fall, I'm really excited to offer a little bit longer experiences. I'm going to start an online somatic academy, I'm calling it, and to do an ATM lesson, and then go to pause your Zoom, go try it out with your instrument, and then come back and talk about it, and then do another ATM. So if people are interested, just, yeah, be in touch. I'm really excited about it, and I thank you for this opportunity to talk to you today.
Of course, of course. If someone is interested and wants to contact you, they could do that via your website. And you have a couple of Facebook pages that are
Oh,
dedicated as well,
yeah,
right?
true. Forgot about that.
Plug
Um,
everything.
yeah, I know. So I don't even know how erinfinkelstein.com on Facebook started. I don't think I even started it. Somebody else did. And so, anyways, there's that. And then there's Feldenkrais for musicians. And then I said and for the general public, because it's really, I mean, I work with kids with cerebral palsy and older people and people who aren't musicians, so it's really for everybody, but since I'm a musician, obviously. But that's a Facebook group that has a lot of followers, and I'm encouraging practitioners to post there also, so you can get other information. There's a gentleman who did a whole thesis and is offering classes on piano pedagogy from a Feldenkrais perspective. How
Mm.
cool! So that's a really great place. And then, of course, Instagram, and I even joined Twitter. I know, it's so 2002. It's like, so I finally bit the bullet. I don't know why. but yeah, and then info at erinfinkelstein.com is how you can reach me.
Great. Thank you again so much.
Oh yeah, I'm so looking forward to hearing you and following what you're doing. You're doing great work. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Have a great day.